The Emancipation Proclamation was a landmark executive order issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, during the American Civil War. This proclamation declared the freedom of all enslaved people in the Confederate States in rebellion against the Union. It marked a pivotal shift in the U.S. government's stance on slavery, evolving the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a moral crusade to end slavery. The proclamation, however, didn't immediately free all enslaved people, but it was a critical step towards the abolition of slavery, fundamentally altering the nature of the Civil War and the future of the United States. It also laid the groundwork for the eventual passage of the 13th Amendment, which would completely abolish slavery in the U.S. a few years later in 1865. By 1862, the Civil War had been raging for over a year. Initially, President Lincoln's primary goal was to preserve the Union, not necessarily to end slavery. However, as the war progressed and with the Confederacy's continued defiance, Lincoln realized that slavery was a major pillar supporting the Southern economy and military strength. His views on slavery were evolving, influenced by moral, political, and military considerations. Several events helped shape Lincoln's decision to issue the proclamation. In the spring and summer of 1862, Union armies occupied large parts of the South. Lincoln used these military successes as a basis for the legal groundwork of emancipation. He began to see emancipation not only as a moral imperative, but as a strategic war measure. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that, as of January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were to be freed. This executive order applied only to states that were in rebellion, not to the border states, slave states that stayed in the Union, like Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, or Southern territories occupied by Union forces. The proclamation was framed as a war measure, citing Lincoln's power as commander-in-chief to take actions necessary to suppress the rebellion. It didn't free all enslaved individuals in the country, but it was a significant step toward total abolition. In addition to freeing enslaved people, the proclamation also authorized the recruitment of African American soldiers into the Union Army, which would play a crucial role in the eventual victory. While the Emancipation Proclamation didn't immediately free any slaves in the South, it had a profound psychological impact on both the Confederacy and enslaved individuals. The Confederacy viewed the proclamation as a declaration of war aimed directly at their way of life. On the other hand, enslaved African Americans saw it as a beacon of hope, with many fleeing their plantations and seeking refuge with Union forces. The proclamation also made it clear that the Union war effort was now about ending slavery, a moral cause that resonated with abolitionists and shifted public opinion both in the U.S. and abroad. It had political ramifications, especially in Europe, where many were watching the war closely. The proclamation discouraged European powers like Britain and France from supporting the Confederacy. The Emancipation Proclamation was a controversial decision. Many in the North, particularly in the border states and among conservative factions, were unhappy about the federal government intervening in the institution of slavery. Some worried that it would antagonize the South and prolong the war. However, Lincoln's political genius was in his ability to rally support for emancipation, even in the face of fierce opposition. He understood that this was a war for the future of the nation, and the proclamation not only symbolized the Union's commitment to freedom, but also helped to unite Northern troops and the American people around a moral cause. The proclamation had significant military implications. It allowed the Union to enlist African American soldiers, and by the end of the Civil War, approximately 180,000 African Americans had joined the Union Army, many of whom were formerly enslaved. These soldiers helped to turn the tide in favor of the Union. Economically, the Emancipation Proclamation weakened the Confederate economy by depriving the South of slave labor, which was integral to its agricultural economy. It also boosted morale in the North, as Union soldiers fought not just for the Union, but to bring freedom to the enslaved people of the South. Though the Emancipation Proclamation was a monumental step, it did not permanently abolish slavery. The proclamation only applied to Confederate-held areas, and the institution of slavery continued in the border states and areas under Union control. After the proclamation, Lincoln and the Republican Party focused on passing the 13th Amendment, which would abolish slavery throughout the entire United States. The 13th Amendment passed Congress on January 31, 1865, and was ratified later that year on December 6, ensuring the permanent end of slavery in the U.S. The Emancipation Proclamation was not only a military strategy, but a moral victory. It changed the nature of the Civil War and made the abolition of slavery a central goal of the Union's war effort. The proclamation reshaped the future of the United States, setting the stage for a nation that would, after the Civil War, begin the difficult process of integrating formerly enslaved people into society. Its legacy is profound. It marked the beginning of the end for slavery and demonstrated the federal government's commitment to liberty and equality. The 13th Amendment, which followed in 1865, would secure the promise of freedom for all Americans, but the road to true equality would continue through the struggles of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. The Emancipation Proclamation remains one of the most important documents in American history. It symbolized the Union's commitment to the moral cause of liberty and justice and laid the groundwork for the eventual abolition of slavery. Though its effects were initially limited, its broader significance cannot be overstated, as it fundamentally changed the course of the Civil War and set the stage for a more just and equitable nation.